Okay, good morning again. So this is 3.2 of our US history. What does it mean to be American? Right now, you should have done your do now and answered your own reflection on this James Baldwin. He's a writer and a poet, and very, very known in social sciences and history topics. So let's go through our definition. So you're going to be taking notes. So agriculture economy is an economy that relied on Earth's resources to meet the needs of people. Um, so back then there was no cash. Um, and so the way people traded off was through what people grew. So for example, cotton, tobacco, rice, and they would trade that off, and that's what made the economy go around. Next, we have is enslaved. Usually we say a slave person, but because a slave person is saying that they were already born with it, and enslaved just tells a person that it tells that the human being was forced to be a slave. So when you hear me say enslaved person, even me, I catch myself using the word slave. I want to make sure that we are, respected and honoring those lives that were forced into this system. Next, we have is labor. Labor is a word that is used to talk about work, especially if it's hard physical work, like farmers, those who pick our foods in the fields. That's labor. Construction workers, that's a labor job. They are building buildings in extreme weathers, right? So when we say the word labor, when you hear me say the word labor, this is what I'm talking about. Finally, we have plantation, which is a large estate where only plants are grown for agricultural purposes and usually on one type. So during these times, you had these owners, and usually they were white male owners, and they would have these homes, large mansions, and in these large mansions, they owned these fields, and in these fields, they planted a specific crop. So, for example, cotton and tobacco was one of them. So, when you hear me say the word plantation, you should imagine a big house with a big land. Okay, so we're going to be discussing about African African American history. But before we discuss that, I want to get into the idea of our country. So, different people from Europe moved to the colonies looking for freedom, right? So, they all came from Europe and they all landed here. These were the first 13 colonies that started the US. So we have all these lists. We have Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, and Pennsylvania. These were the first 13 colonies. However, when we talk about freedom, right? We see these people came to this land, and they came into this land to have a better life. However, there were already people that were living in these countries, as we discussed in the last unit. So, what about the indigenous people who were pushed off their lands and enslaved and killed, right? And what about the enslaved people that were dehumanized and forced to build the foundations of the US? What about their freedom? Does their freedom not count? And that's what I want us to think about. These colonies became very wealthy and rich because of the plantation economics, agricultural economics. The European countries needed a large supply of labor to make the colonies wealthy. So first they used the indigenous people, right? And then after they decided like, hey, indigenous people, it's not working out. They're dying. They're not really working with us. They're constantly rebelling. we need to figure out how to plant our crops. So they started in the 1500s and they began purchasing enslaved Africans from West African traders. So they literally bought humans so they can work the fields. And through this, um, the plantation economies became very, very wealthy because it was a success. So remember in the Pocahontas documentary, if you could try to remember, um, they they um they planted tobacco and rice, and that is because that profit came from the labor of enslaved Africans. And so again, I'm using the word enslaved person because he is a human first, not a property. These people, and the enslaved people, they were not seen as human beings. They were seen as a machine. They did not, the plantation owners did not think of them as worthy. And so this is why it's important that we use our language and be careful with how we specify these human beings. Also, we want to discuss that African history does not start with the British colonies, and it does not start with US slavery. So they have more history than just being enslaved people, right? But because this is the U history class and right now we're talking about that topic, I just want to make sure that you are aware of this. So in our books, in a history book, I'm going to make this bigger. I want you to, in your notes, I want you to look very closely. What is historically incorrect about the wording on this textbook? On this textbook page. So let's look closer. One of the defining attributes of the United States is that it is a large country of immigrants and their descendants, people from the past. About 13% of people in the United States are foreign born, while Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians make up about 2% of the population. The remaining population is descended from immigrants. So here we see between 1880, more than 4 million Italian immigrants arrived. Mexico is the top country of origin for U.S. immigrants. And then let's look at this. The Atlantic slave trade. Between 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa's southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. What is incorrect about this wording? And what did I say about how they brought Africans? Did they apply for a job? Did they ask to be there? If you are thinking that the word worker or patterns of immigration is incorrect, you are correct because this book is telling high schoolers, middle schoolers that they they decided to move to this country because they were looking for work. The word work, a worker is different from an enslaved person. So this book itself is giving information that is not accurate. And so how do you think that story is being told? Correct? In addition, we're going to skip this. I want to talk about some awful history of awful history. So, in the past, American history textbook did a terrible job explaining slavery to students. Instead of the truth, students were taught racist lies. So, here is an actual reading about in a book, and this is what it says: Slavery offered a better life for the than did Africa. In his new home, the N word was for away from the spears and war clubs of enemy tribes. He had some of the comforts of civilized life. And so these words are extremely old, so we don't use that anymore. We use African American, we use Africans or blacks, black folks. So this itself is just, it tells you like how it wasn't really well thought out, you know. Here we have another textbook in Texas from 2018, so not too long ago, 5 years ago. While there were cruel masters who maimed means hurt, or even killed their slaves. Oh no! Oh, come on. So- okay. Killed their slaves. Although killing and hurting were against the law in every state, they were also kind and generous owners. Many enslaved people may not have been terribly unhappy with their lot, for they knew no other. So they're saying that although they weren't hurt or killed, it was against the law, but some enslaved people were okay with it because they didn't have an option. And so a teacher had them write the positive aspects of slavery and the negative aspects of slavery. And so this just is, I just want you to know that the topic of slavery here in the US is sometimes hard because some people want to talk it this way and make it seem like there was good things and bad things, but in actuality it was not. It was not a good thing. And this is a history that we're going to have to discuss and really question the idea of like what does it mean to be American, because this is where it all started from. And so what is the legacy of American slavery and what are the origins of American slavery is what we're going to hit on um, as the lesson continues. Okay, sorry this is very long, but continue with your notes, answer as be detailed as possible, and then we'll be done. Bye.